About 100 years ago, this big organization with many branches, they wanted to rule the world basically using Britain as a nucleus of a system, an embryo, which also was going to be joined with the US under the Anglo-American establishment, wrote about the kind of culture and the changes of culture over a 100-year period that they would actually design. We're all tribal to an extent, that's why we even bother to vote for a tribal leader. This is well understood, that's why we're supplied with these leaders. And because the average man was to become more disengaged from his own destiny as the expert class arose, it was decided that the males would get their outlet, basically, gradually becoming helpless as males, through sports. Therefore, they'd have a tribal team they could identify with, they could cheer them on as they were winning. In their own personal lives, they were getting nowhere, they were getting disenfranchised in a sense as experts took over decision-making for them in all kinds of fields. So this was psychology at use, planned before they even implemented the sports. When radio came along, of course, they used that to the maximum. Sports for the men, soaps basically for the women, and then in came television with its alpha state, its hypnotic state, and men became glued to the sports shows. As I say, since the 1960s, once television really took off, sports used to only come out on Saturdays. And over a 10-year period, it gradually came on every night of the week. Until today, we have even sports channels, sports. So now you see guys who are sitting home, who are basically powerless at work. They have bosses. They're powerless on the roads. There's police and traffic wardens and cops watching them. They have no means to feel strong. And so they tend to watch sports as a substitute. They project themselves into a game which they never participate in, but as long as their team wins, they feel something's happening in their life that's positive and it's successful. It's a very good substitute for many things as far as the elite are concerned. The intention being ultimately to alter society, drastically alter it so much that even the purpose, for instance, of marriage would lose any appeal. People don't realize they brought in the miniskirt back in the 1920s during Prohibition. They brought in cocaine at the same time along with the booze to get young people in. The idea being that if you're doing something illegal, it's very naughty. Youngsters love to break the rules, get together, we're all being naughty together. And sex and booze, coupled with coke being smuggled in at that time, had its desired effects. So they came out, as I say, with not sex and rock and roll, but sex in a form of jazz. The Charleston dance came in, the miniskirt came in, sex became rather rampant for the first time. All the old traditional taboos were broken with one generation, but there was fallout to this change, this massive change in culture. The fallout being that they did not have the antibiotics to treat all the sexually transmitted disease that came along. Secondly, they didn't have the legal abortion clinics to take care of the unwanted children that also were produced by hyper-promiscuity. They opened up big orphanages to try and take care of this, the boys' towns, they had ones for girls too. But there was so much backlash, especially in the United States, from the old Christian communities, that they had to tone it all down. It kind of flopped. Sexually transmitted disease became rampant, so did unwanted pregnancies and abortions. And so they went back to the drawing board, because remember, before this all happened, the big players, the new high priesthood, we'll call them, of the Time Lords, those who create the future, work in think tanks for the big establishment, had a definite mandate. The only problem was how do you achieve that mandate over a time period. And they've always known, for instance, in wartime, more children are produced because people, young people who might go off to die tomorrow tend to be far more promiscuous. They brought this back after World War II big time and worked on it steadily. All our tax money went into one particular area of research, not just for the atomic weaponry and so on. It went into finding ways of finding a contraceptive that was effective. When they found it and launched it on the scene, at the same time as it launched what they called pop music, along with drugs, LSD and so on, they brought out the contraceptive. So then permission was given, in a sense, and promoted from the top down, even from the BBC, which is, remember, the BBC is owned by the British government. It's an arm of the British government. It talks on behalf of the dominant minority who rule Britain. So they began to promote all this stuff. All the DJs they'd bring on television would interview the top pop stars of the day. They were all stoned out their minds. Some of them were falling out of chairs. And the interviewers would say, "Gee hee, aren't we naughty children?" All aimed at a young generation to emulate. This is what we do. Monkey see, monkey do. Once again, remember, the prime intent was to break the old culture of boy meets girl, going together for a while, getting engaged, getting married, having children. The family unit, they'd said, when we had the League of Nations, which was the precursor of the United Nations, said they'd have to destroy the family unit. Pretty well all of H.G. Wells's non-fiction books promotes all of this agenda. And in fact, he coined the term in the late 1800s. This is how far back this agenda of promiscuity had to go. He coined the term free love. And in one of his books written before 1890, he says, we must promote free love in order to destroy and end the obsolete family unit. Once that's done, he said, the family is no longer in the way when government comes for an individual. Each individual will be solely responsible to the government itself, and no family will stand up around them like a primitive tribe and defend them. At the same time, the foundations within the United States and Britain and elsewhere were funding what appeared to be far-left groups, communist groups. So much so, as I say, the Rees Commission went in to look into this from the 50s to find out why top capitalists who owned international corporations and banks, international banks, were putting up foundations to fund far-left groups. Well, we know now it was to literally destroy the old culture in order to bring in the new culture, the new society. So therefore you have the proliferation of sexual activity. The fallout still came from unwanted pregnancies, far reduced than it had before because of contraception. But then came the lead of the feminist charge, again funded by the Rockefeller Foundation in the States, to spearhead and demonstrate and demand the rights for abortion. If they could get the public to devalue human life, and that's in the writings of Julian Huxley. He says, if we can get society to devalue human life, he says, and take humanity off its pedestal as a supreme being on the planet, then, he said, we can bring in our controlled society with a workable population. Everything works within culture towards an agenda. And as Plato said so long ago, over 2,300 years ago, culture and cultural changes must be authorized from the top. If it's grassroots, truly grassroots, then it's outside of the elite's control, and ripple effects could occur, and it could spread anywhere. They couldn't control it, contain it anymore. Therefore, the major changes in culture, which Plato said came through drama and the emulation of actors, actresses, including fashions that they wore, and the music they heard, had to be strictly regulated and authorized from the top. The whole science of this, which was always a science, and understood by those in those businesses, was used to the maximum to literally drastically alter culture so radically in the 60s and 70s that they could never return to a past way of living.
We look around us and we know that there's something wrong, because your neighbour next door is a nice person, your family are nice, people you work with are nice. People want to have a nice society where we can live in peace and just live and be free of wars. So you think, well, where's it coming from? What's the origin of it? The Catholic Church, the Roman cult, has been very, very, very busy in the last couple of thousand years. This empire is our enemy, with the backing of the Roman cult and a very, very dark priesthood. What the Catholic Church did in 1302, Pope Boniface VIII, bon means good, face means to do in Latin, do-gooder. This guy and the Catholic Church, always desiring to control with their inquisitions, decided that they would create the first express trust in history. Alright, that trust is called Unum Sanctum. What does the papal bull say? It says that all the world and all the souls in it are ours. They made a claim of right. They rocked up, sitting on top of the world, look around, seeing all these people sleeping, got all these gold in their vaults and all this power, and they said, we own the world. And so they do, because no one has challenged that. No one has challenged unum sanctum, this papal bull. It's in the vaults, and it's a curse on mankind, and I'll show you how. This was the first express trust in history, so they have claimed the whole world and all the souls therein. They have registered you. Claim your dominion as children of God, of the universe, and not as their slaves, as people lost at sea, incompetent, with no soul, because they own it. They're insane. The elite families who control the Vatican and who are behind this corporation, monotheism, military, money, monarchies, actually sit on top, behind the scenes, but they work together. Families of the world who think they have better blood than the rest, and they have their think tanks, then they have their financial control system, world resource control, world population control, and there's a little sheep down the bottom called debt slaves. We're all debted, and you get taxed. Half of it goes to the government. You know those titles you have? You don't own it. You own nothing. You do not own a thing. Well, you can't anyway. They're molecules. They belong to the universe, for a start. But you can have right of use. That's all that title means. You will never own it. Never in this system. In this system, which is about to end. This is their fictional kingdom that they created. Remember Shrek and the king and his fictional characters? Same deal.
How do you get a domesticated herd to move from a field, a system in which it's been grazing for 20, 50 years, this kind of system, to this field over here, this new field, because we have reluctance to change. We like familiarity, we like routine. You do it by various techniques, one of which is revolution. Most revolutions are bloodless. You have cultural revolutions, sexual revolutions, along with that comes the music revolutions, etc. These literally are designed to alter and direct culture, knowing what kind of culture they'll have at the very end of it too. They know exactly what kind of culture they want to come out of it. You also can do it through crisis creation. Crisis after crisis has been hit on the people of the world since 9/11 happened. And we must understand that the techniques that are used abroad are also used at home in warfare. And we heard the term shock and awe. Shock and awe on the hard force level, as they call it, is bombs, all kinds of acoustic equipment to nullify enemies, scare the hell out of them through voice to skull and so on, which was used in Gulf War I, and it's all over the British media. But you can also use shock and awe on your domestic people. You do it by crisis after crisis until the public are so terrified. See, the average person has a sort of confidence that they build up where they think, I can manage most things that come my way. Whatever little crisis in my life, what happens to other people, I can deal with. When all those around you are getting scared at the same time as you because they're losing their jobs, they've been threatened with pandemics, terrorists everywhere, terrifying people to even get on subways, and so on. And all those around you, as I say, are also in the same boat. You tend to be more easily directed by the powers that be that come out and speak with authority and confidence over you. Shock and awe, as I say, is a technique of making a person and a whole population punch drunk. The average person can handle one major crisis in their personal life, maybe two at the same time. It's understood in psychology and many studies that if you have maybe 3 to 4 crises hitting you personally in your life at the same time, you will literally go into an incredible depression, a reactive depression. You can't cope. That's understood. Apply that technique on a whole population. The thing is, there's not one of these crises that we're being told about that you personally can do anything about. What can you do about terrorism if it really exists all over the place? It's out of your hands, you're helpless. What can you do about a coming pandemic? It's out of your hands, you're helpless. What can you do about a nuke getting set off? You can't, you're helpless. The message you're getting is that you're utterly helpless to defend, help, or save yourself. That is complete shock and awe tactic that's been used not only in the US and Canada, but across the world. Same strategy, because we're already global with the global society running us all. Massive psychology and warfare techniques in psychology has been used across the planet to make us succumb to fear and crises, none of which we can actually do anything about on an individual level. Therefore, the leaders are presented to us on screen with uniforms or business suits and ties as politicians who speak with confidence, all scripted of course, and they seem to have everything under control. You're now basically a fearful slave looking up to the powerful master to defend and protect you. That's the simple technique of it.
More and more laws are being created every month, every year, every week that curb our rights and our freedom. These are the laws created by the governments and the people we put into positions of authority, our servants that are supposed to serve us, right? And these servants are making laws that constantly curtail and decrease our rights and our freedoms. It has turned our planet into a planet of brands, corporations, and where jobs are promised to people. Every time we hear a politician talk about, oh, we're going to create 1 million more jobs, all they're really saying is we're going to create 1 million more slaves, when this is supposed to be our planet. What this really points to is the fact that this thing called money has infiltrated every crack and crevice of our existence. Every aspect of our lives, from the first breath we take till the last breath we breathe out. It's a complete insanity how this has been distorted. This thing of believing that we are free needs to be addressed. And the people that still run around saying that I'm free, I can do what I want, live in a complete and utter illusion. So the historic resistance to money goes back thousands of years. It's not something new. This very popular character, Jesus or Jeshua or Issa, one of the famous incidents is when he apparently chased out the bankers or the money changers from the temple. One of the few moments or events of his life where he probably showed violence or became violent with other individuals. It was with the bankers in the temple. Because this is really, really significant. That the original bankers were actually the royal priests and the kings, and the banks were the first banks were their temples. The global financial institution is the largest organized crime syndicate in the world. Very few people actually have any clue or idea where money really comes from. So the origins of money, when and how did it get so bad? What was the first money created? How did it come into existence and creation? The critical information about the origins of money comes to us from the Sumerian text, the Sumerian tablets, that give us a lot of information about the earliest kings, the first kings of the world, and a lot of other information. That there was a time in history, these gods that were causing havoc on planet Earth, and especially in the land of Sumer and interacting with the Sumerian people. There was a time that the royal bloodlines suddenly emerged on Earth. And that these priest kings, these first priest kings were actually appointed. The first priest kings were appointed by the gods, and we suddenly see the appearance of the royal political bloodlines. And then suddenly they had all this money and they owned all the land. So this is the origins of the royal bloodlines. And these are the guys that have passed down the royal bloodline control for thousands of years. And the banking families are part of this ancient royal bloodline. Only the royalty knew how to write. They had scribes. Only written material ever came out of the royal palaces and the temples with the scribes. The average people didn't know how to do that, so they couldn't even read. Money was maliciously introduced as a tool of enslavement. This seems to be the moment that this happened. In these ancient times, when the first royal bloodlines were introduced, when these first priest kings suddenly appear. Because most of us are under the misconception that money is a consequence of thousands of years of barter and trade. Money was maliciously introduced as a tool of enslavement. That is its only pure intent, is to enslave people. Instead of having chains and whips, you have a thing called money. The first kings owned all the land. They were the first bankers, and the temples were the first banks. somehow imbued with some sort of black magic that has turned people into mumbling idiots. Look what money does to people. It makes some people go crazy. It makes people commit murder. It makes people kill their families, kill their friends, kill their partners. It makes people commit horrendous crimes because of this thing called money. It's tainted with blood, and this is what we need to get away from.